and this is An Ordinary Man. And today's program is going to be focusing on then and now. And that time period that we're going to talk about then is the 1960s, about 60 years ago. And we're going to compare it to the 2020s, which is right now. And we're going to take a look at that as to what it really means to us today, what we need to be doing as Christians, because things have changed, if you haven't noticed it, quite a bit since the 1960s. For example, do you remember work hours in the 60s? They were basically 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock, and they were always in the office. And you were always talking to people, seeing people, visiting over the coffee pot, organizing your luncheon plans. Well, now almost 30% of the people who are in our workforce are at home and have zero direct socialization or connection with people. Oh, yeah, maybe a text, maybe an email, maybe an occasional phone call. But as far as visiting incidentally with business and personal, gone for 30%, over 30%. And so that's one major change, workplace socialization. Second, education. Most of us grew up in a system where there was K through 12, which meant we were in a school setting, probably with anywhere from 20 to 30 kids every hour, teachers interacting in sports, in music, in English, history, etc. And it was going, and it was just part of growing up. You were interacting with your people, sharing information. And that factor has also changed. In fact, nearly 25% of all high school diplomas are done online. And that number is greater for people who go to trade school, trade schools and college. They lose that social interaction. In fact, when I was at my old campus at Emporia State, I was shocked to see that they can literally do their class remotely in their dorm room, as opposed to being in a classroom interacting with other people, other students. The next factor is even more different then and as it is today. Then 72% of all adults over the age, pardon me, of 21 were married. 72%. Today, that marriage number is 31%. That foundation number of a strong society, marriage, has dropped by over 50%. The last thing, no, pardon me. Before I get to the last thing, I've got to also mention food. Food is a big social factor. People do 90% of their time when they're eating, talking, unless it's really, really good food. But even that, the connection during a meal is significant. In fact, it's so significant that many times the family in the 60s made all their plans during a meal. And in the 60s, approximately 80% of all of their meals were eaten at home. Yeah, and that's involving time away from work. I'm not going to, that time in work is not going to be considered. But when they were not at work, not in an office setting, but literally had freelance to go to lunch and breakfast and dinner, they found that in the 60s, over 80% of the people were literally um, eating at home. Today, that number, as opposed to being 80% eating at home, is less than 20% of the people who, with the option, eat at home. 20%. That means that communication, that family communication at dinner time is almost gone for the family. When we look at that, we now look at something else, and that's called the interaction communication. In other words, media. What's it doing? Is it helping with socialization and connection? Well, in the 60s, the major mode of communication, media communication, was the hard copy newspaper. Believe it or not, the hard copy newspaper, because that was a tool that they took with them, shared with other people, cut out articles and shared articles, discussed them, literally used that as a means of communication throughout the day. That hard copy newspaper. Well, today, the hard copy newspaper is almost impossible to find. What's replaced it? The internet. The internet, which is literally in your home, in your office, in your car, by yourself. It is a source of great knowledge, but it lacks the factor of communication and connection. That just does not exist with internet. Yeah, you can do some Gmails, some emails, some messaging, but that really doesn't understand the issue. The issue is socializing, connecting, sharing ideas. Well, what do you think about that? What do you think about this? But that is almost gone when you use the internet. And that newspaper used to do that. Now, finally, the major tool for the American society for socialization and connection was the church. The church, which has, essentially three things to do: educate, correct, and socialize. The socialization factor was a major means for people to be educated and also get their act together and maybe avoid making wrong choices. Church attendance in the 60s was around 70%. 70%. Today, it's lucky to hit 32%. 32%, which means 68% of the people are not receiving literally correction information, education information, and socialization. The tools of a church. And when I talk about church, I'm not talking about a building. I'm talking about a body of Christ. People who gather together, they can be gathered together in a church, in a home, under a tent, maybe even at a social gathering, at a American Legion, VFW, etc. It is Christians gathering together, sharing and educating one another, socializing, and of course, helping in correction. That variable, that content that is usually saved for a Sunday has almost gone away. And with that comes the crumbling of a society like the United States of America. It has been dependent upon that for many, many, many years, since its foundation of over 250 years ago. So I want to say that this is what an ordinary man is going to address in 2026. How do we, as Christians, fulfill the obligation of the body of Christ? In other words, how do we educate people? These children many times don't even know, these young people, I call them children if they're under 30, these young people don't even have an appreciation for Pearl Harbor, 9/11, World War II, conflicts like Vietnam and Korea. They don't have that. Then because of that, they don't understand that their course of action or the actions that they see that are constantly in chaos, violence, destruction of property and life do not lead to the end of a society. We have a short period of time right now as Americans to save this country. As Christ helped us build this country, we must build it again. We must restore the American dream. And we do that through the body of Christ. And by doing that, we hopefully will receive the return of Jesus Christ. This is Jim Whining, and this coming year, we're going to cover what it takes to restore our crumbling country by using the body of Christ to fulfill this order of responsibility. Have a very Merry Christmas this year and a Happy New Year. And we'll see you in 2026 to talk about restoring America. God bless.